Hello, my name is Dennis Daly and I'm an interviewer for the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And today I have the honor of interviewing Mr. Raymond Timmerman on April 16th, 2007, tax day. We're at the main library here, and our camera operator today is Yvonne Franklin. Mr. Timmerman, thank you for agreeing to do this interview for us, and it's going to be a great addition to our archive here. Why don't we get started by talking about where'd you grow up?
I grew up mostly in Bellevue, Kentucky, just across the Ohio River, not more than a stone's throw from here. And I went to grade school there, and then I attended St. Xavier's High School, which was at that time very close to here, just about 2 squares away downtown. It was over by St. Xavier Church,
okay,
not far away. And I went there from 1940 to 1944. And then I went to the University of Cincinnati for approximately 1 year, actually hurried up sort of thing. And then I was drafted into the Navy, and in northern Kentucky, in Campbell County. And that's when my, quote, military career started.
So what you were drafted in 1945?
I was drafted actually in 1944. I think I turned 18 on the 31st of August, 1944. And they were out to get you very quickly, man. So it didn't take very long. I was in Great Lakes boot camp by November of 44. Fortunately, I was able to get about a year's college in during that time. They did have a special thing that seniors in high school then could spend their last half year at the university. If they had good grades and did well, they could then transfer to the university and stay. So I went to the university for that length of time.
Okay.
We had at the university, we had something called the ASTP group. They were actually Army men who had gone back to college once they were drafted, and these men were there as a unit, and they marched around the campus, and I remember distinctly they all of a sudden disappeared one day, and then almost overnight, and they were the only males practically on the campus. They all were taken off to go to the front lines in Europe, because all of a sudden the needs became greater there, and they all disappeared. So they disappeared in quite a hurry, and so then we were left. But then at the time I was drafted, I went it was the early part of November of 1944. I went from Campbell County to Louisville, which is where they gathered you together, and then went on a train to Chicago, and then to Great Lakes.
Just a quick question, sort of interesting. When you got drafted, were you able to choose the branch that you wanted to go into?
I was, yes. Okay. To some extent, you could, if you were sort of had pretty good grades, and I think if you had any other schooling, that they gave you some preference, and they asked where you wanted to go. I said, well, all my friends were in the Navy, I'll go into the Navy. They also had Marines sitting there saying, do you want to come here, and blah, blah. But the Navy was the popular thing at that time. I don't know why for sure.
So you went to Great Lakes to do your boot camp training?
At Great Lakes, it was I think a 16-week boot camp.
And while you were there, did you get any kind of special training, or was it just basic training, and then you sort of went?
It was strictly basic. You learned how to be a sailor, and how to salute, and how to wear a uniform, and a lot of things we actually learned. It was interesting. We actually learned a fair amount of things. They had something called the Blue Jackets Manual, which is still, sailors still get it, and it's about so thick, and it's that size book, and it has all how to tie knots, and how to recognize ships, and how to recognize airplanes. It's a really interesting book. I still have a copy somewhere, and it was good. Anyway, we learned all that, and then we learned how to be miserable too, because they certainly made ways to get you miserable. I was in Chicago, and it's cold as the dickens in the wintertime in Chicago. It's just free. And they got us out on, I remember the most miserable day of my life was out on the lake shore. The Great Lakes, I should identify, is about 30 miles north of Chicago on Lake Michigan. And it's extremely cold in the winter. They got us out there in the middle of the winter doing something called firefighting, which was a big mess. And then we also were allowed to shoot big guns. That was interesting. We got to shoot these 20 millimeter, they were 20 millimeter, they're called ACAC guns. They had a shell about a foot and a half long, and they were individual shells, and they would, I remember very distinctly still hearing them go boom, 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 boom. That's the way they shot.
What, if you could describe, what was firefighting?
It was they had a setup at the Great Lakes. They had sort of cement bunkers, and they could create fires in them with oil.
Okay.
And they started them on fire, and you had to go in. The idea was on a ship, if you had fire, of course, you had to go in and put the fire out. And they had these hoses, which had very fine mystic sprays on the end. And they were, perhaps 10 feet long, and you could get them going. And then the idea was to get on a fire suit and go into this place and smother the fire with the water mist. And it worked.
But you were doing this in the wintertime?
And we were doing it in the wintertime, and it was cold. And then everything would freeze. You would get in there and put the fire out, and then your hoses would freeze. They freeze in a short time, solid. And you had to, so we got one fire out, and then it got so cold they decided to call off the exercises. But there we stood for about 4 hours in the cold because there was no place to get warm, and so we just started, oh, it was cold. Anyway, that was my experience. And boot camp was very interesting. I met a lot of people. Most of our group was from Wisconsin, from a place called Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. And I still remember their accent. I can spot it even now if I hear somebody say from Oconomowoc.
Oh, specifically from that town?
You can never miss it once you hear it once. But that was it. And then from there, they had something that you had a choice of where to go. You could go to a ship if you wanted, if you desired it. You put that down, and they asked you where would you prefer to go, and then or did you want to go to a service school? Well, I chose to go to Hospital Corps School, which was, it turned out it was in San Diego, and it was also a 16-week course. And so I went to that.
Vast difference, though, when you went to San Diego from Chicago.
Yeah.
So at that point, this is early 45.
That was, by that time, boot camp was over in early 45. We came home for 10 days. And then
went for 16 weeks to corpsman training.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, were you thinking that you were going to be trained to go to the Pacific Theater?
At that time, I think the Pacific Theater was becoming more prominent. That was, the Battle of the Bulge was in, I believe, December, January of 1944, 45. And that was after that, the Germans pretty well started falling apart. And because they lost it, and that's when they knew they lost the war. Mm-hmm. They knew it before that, but they wouldn't admit it. And so we thought we'd probably end up somewhere in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese.
What kind of stuff did you learn when you were in corpsman school?
Oh, very interesting stuff. I mean, we learned how to change beds and make beds. So I can make a pretty good bed. And we learned basic treatment, and we learned treatment of wounds, how to dress a wound. We didn't really do it, but we learned how. They had a staff there. I still remember the nurse who taught us was very good. She was excellent, and she taught us, and she was very good. She was from Wisconsin too, as a matter of fact. And we had lessons in pharmacology and pharmacognosy, which is the study of drugs. We had lessons in, well, basically that. It was how to take care of people in a hospital.
Sure. Was this in a working naval hospital?
Yeah, the hospital core was attached to the, are you familiar with San Diego?
Not very.
Well, San Diego has a park there called Balboa Park. It was the International Exposition of 1936, and they built some lovely old temporary buildings in San Diego, which are still there, by the way. And it's still a nice park. And yeah, the Naval Hospital was just next to it. It was a coral cement building. It was very pretty. It was a beautiful place with these tile roofs. It was lovely. Anyway, we got to work in there.
Okay.
That's what we did. And we got to help learn a little something about taking care of wards. Corpsmen were mostly like orderlies, I guess you'd say, except when they were on duty by themselves, in which case they had a very prominent part. I also spent 1 month right after that with what was called then the Fleet Marine Force. It was at Camp Pendleton, and it was when the Marines depended on the Navy for medical care, and the naval officers who were in the Marines wore Marine uniforms. We were given Marine uniforms, went out and did their climbing over hills and dales and so forth with them, and so I was briefly part of the Fleet Marine Force, which was something that was useful.
So were you under the command of Marine drill sergeants and all of that when you were out there? Okay.
And then we were under the command, but we had a little special status because we didn't have to pay attention to everything they said, but mostly, it was mostly we were there to sort of take care of the bumps and scratches and blisters and whatever you get when you sand in your eye and all that type of thing.
When you were in San Diego, did you get a chance to see any of the guys coming back from the Pacific who were wounded, or were you?
Indeed, I didn't see any wounded. They were there. They were just starting to arrive. Well, I should say they were there. Some of the more chronic problems. The Cubans. I did see a ship called the USS Haven, I think it was. They had 4 hospital ships in the Navy at that time. One of which was the Hope, the Haven, the Refuge. And I can't remember the other one. But anyway, one of them was hit by either a torpedo or a kamikaze. I don't know. Anyway, it was blown a big hole in the side. I remember seeing them bring it in. It came in under its own power, but it had a big hole in the side. And they anchored down in the dock and brought their sailors ashore. So I saw them, but that's the only ones I saw.
So you finished your training at San Diego, and then you went into the Fleet Marines for
just a short time.
What happened after that?
Well, then I got lucky. I was reading the bulletin board at the Naval Hospital, and they had a notice saying that men interested in more school training and college training, if they're qualified, can apply for the Naval ROTC and what was then called the V-12 program. So I did, and I stayed at San Diego working in the hospital. I was there. I had an interview in Los Angeles by a board of officers, and we had an exam, blah, blah, blah. And I stayed in San Diego for about 6 months, and then I was sent to college.
Okay.
I got really lucky. I went to a small school called Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, for 1 semester. And then I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and I stayed there from, it was a year's training. I was there for equivalent to a year, although I wasn't there a whole year.
Okay.
Until I was discharged.
So you were in Boulder when VJ did?
I was in Boulder at VJ did.
And what was the feeling like there? I like to ask the vets when you heard about the bombs being dropped. And
there was much happiness and activity, and people drinking too much and carrying on, and it was quite a thrill, because there were a lot of we were somewhat removed from danger. Well, we were removed from danger, but we were removed from this potential disaster, and that was good. And then we stayed there until, and I was discharged from there in July of 1946.
Okay.
Like that.
And then you got discharged, came back to the Cincinnati area?
Yes.
Back through the Union Terminal? And
Yes.
at that time, were you married, or?
Oh, no, I was single.
Single, so you came back to your parents' house.
Yes, in Bellevue.
And then, did you resume your studies at the university?
I did. I went to the University of Cincinnati.
On the GI Bill of rights?
No, I paid my own way.
Did you really?
Well, what happened, I was only eligible for, you were eligible for the length of time you were in the military. So I was in the military about 21 months, and I was eligible for that length of study. And since I wanted to go to medical school, that was about the most expensive. I paid my own way at the university until I graduated, and then I started using the GI Bill in medical school.
So you went to medical school, actually?
Yeah.
Did you go to medical school at the University of Cincinnati also?
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to UC and I graduated in 1947, and then in 1951 I graduated from the medical school.
And from there, I know we were chatting earlier, we'll get to it, I think, eventually, about getting back into the military.
Yeah.
So from there, did you intern? You were in a hospital?
Yeah, the Cincinnati General, then the Cincinnati General Hospital, which is now the University Hospital.
Okay.
I was there for about a year and a half. I went to intern, and that was a year, and then I spent a year and about a year as a medical resident there. And I was there for a little more than a year, and then I was redrafted. Same guys redrafted me who drafted me.
Same draft board?
Same guys. I said, I said, gee.
So this is when Korea broke out.
What happened was that they had a thing that if you hadn't been in the service for less than 21 months, you were eligible for redrafting, and I had been there about 20 months and 2 weeks or something like that. So I get drafted again.
Now, did you get drafted in as a doctor the second time around? Okay.
I did.
Okay.
That's why I got drafted.
So
because they had a special draft for doctors. They didn't have enough volunteering, and so they made a new draft for doctors. And that's how I got in.
Tell us a little bit about that experience. What happened then? Where did you go?
Well, am I taking too long?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, after, let's see, that was probably about April of 1953, I believe that's the year, I was drafted, and from Cincinnati I drove a little car I had to Alabama, where we had a indoctrination course of about 2 months.
I just started to interrupt you. This was not actually the Navy this time around. You were in the Air Force?
In the Air Force, yeah.
Okay.
And we had, at that time, it was the Air Force. About 1948, they separated the Air Force and the Army. So it was the U.S. Air Force, and I was in a different service.
Okay.
And so we learned a little something, and not much. And then we went to, I did go to flight surgeon school at Randolph Field in San Antonio, and we learned a lot there. That was very good.
A flight surgeon, I've heard that term before. Just to educate me and a lot of other people, is that something where you were going to be part of a flight crew that you would be a surgeon on, or is that just a term for somebody that was a surgeon?
The theory then was that pilots needed special medical attention because they were pilots and they were unique, and they were precious because they spent a lot of time training them, and so they tried to get the best care they could. And aviation medicine there was in its infancy, and they did a lot of aviation physiology by putting you in these decompression chambers where you get decompressed, and you learn how to fly too. We learned to fly. We didn't solo, but we learned up to soloing, and so we got experience in being a pilot, and we let's see, and of course some medicine too. We learned, especially aviation is kind of important with vision problems and hearing problems and sinus problems, that sort of thing. So we had a special crash course in being an ear, nose, and throat person. And you learned about physiology and a little bit about camaraderie with Air Force personnel and that sort of thing. It was a good 4 months.
And this was in?
This ended up in about, let's see, about somewhere in late 40 and late 53, we then again said, where would you like to go since you're finished here and you're ready for assignment? And so we had a choice of, I got lucky there too. We had an assignment in Korea, nobody wanted to go there. We had an assignment for Europe and for Asia and the United States. Well, everybody chose the United States. Number 2 was Europe, and number 3 and 4 was Asia and Korea. And so I said, well, I'll go to Europe. So they took me, and zoom, I went. So I went to France.
Okay. So at that time, there were American Air Force bases in France?
We had, the Air Force had still some leftover bases in England from World War II. They had quite a nice number of bases in Germany from having defeated Germany. There were lots of airports and military things everywhere in Germany. And then they had just started the NATO bases in Europe, in France, and they were in France, and eventually they ended up, I think, a little bit in Spain and Italy, but mostly they were in France.
So you were on a NATO base when you went over?
Air bases.
Yeah, NATO air base?
Yeah. It was actually a French air base.
Okay.
It was a French air base, but we were kind of in charge of it since it was mostly our personnel.
Mostly Americans at the...
Almost all Americans.
Okay.
There was a small French group, or they were the assistant commander of the base was French officer, and but we had mostly control. They had a very small number of airplanes there. They had and then we got to know them a little bit.
And your experiences in France, what kind of stuff did you do overseas there?
I worked on the air base as a staff reserves. We had, I think we had about 1,600 personnel we tried to take care of in the airmen, and we had 3 doctors and a doctor who was sort of in charge of the medical department. So we had 4, and there was quite a bit of work actually. We worked every 3rd night, and we worked every 3rd weekend because the commander didn't do that, and so we were on call every 3rd night and every 3rd weekend. So it was pretty busy actually.
Did you get a chance to travel to Paris on a weekend pass at all?
Yeah, our air base was in a city called Laon, L-A-O-N, which is a city in northeastern France. Are you familiar with France?
A little bit, yes.
Well, it was near the city of Reims, we used to call it. It's not the way you say it because they don't know what you're talking about. Reims, and it's very close to there.
Okay.
There was a famous old place there called Coucy-le-Château. Have you ever heard of Coucy-le-Château?
Nah.
Well, it was the largest fiefdom in France in the mid-centuries. It was huge. It took up most of northern France, and it was run by the Sieur de Coucy. Coucy, here you want to say it, and it was an interesting spot.
Sounds like it. And you were telling me, as we were chatting off camera, did you actually have an opportunity, did you go with the group that went to Indochina?
Yes.
During when the French were fighting?
Well, our air base was a French air base, and we had B-26s. They were they were a World War II aircraft that was relatively new at the end of World War II, and it was a good airplane. It was a Douglas B-26. It was, but anyway, it was a good airplane, and they flew them as combat aircraft. They weren't jets, but we didn't have any jet bombers then, except one, and so they flew them, and the French Air Force had them in their armament, and at the time of Van Fu, they had need for some additional ones because they lost 1 or 2, and 1 or 2 were always broken. And so we flew them. We flew 6 of them there, and that's how I got to Vietnam and so forth.
What part of did you actually get to Dien Bien Phu, the fort, or did you stay?
No, we went to Hanoi.
Hanoi, okay.
We were in Hanoi. At that time, the French army was still in control of most of
So you were actually in what became North Vietnam?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, Hanoi was a very French city. It was very, boulevards. It was a nice city, actually. They had nice hotels. They had nice, it was very pleasant. It was.
How long did you stay in Vietnam?
Oh, just a short while. I think 3 weeks.
Okay.
That sort of, just long enough for them to check out the planes and be sure the planes were running well.
Did you get out much in Hanoi and see some of the people there, or?
I did. Just out in the city.
Did you have any sort of feeling, because at that time there probably wasn't much anti-American sentiment there. It was mostly probably anti-French sentiment.
Well, if there was anti-French, it wasn't evident, but they did recommend you not go out in the countryside because they weren't sure how safe you would be.
That's fascinating. And so then from Vietnam back to France, or did you?
Went very briefly up to, we just flew, we had a couple planes to take back, and we flew up briefly to Korea, which wasn't very far, and we stopped there, and then flew back to France over the same route. We went to Indonesia, and then we flew to India, part of India on the west coast of India, and I can't remember where it was. And then we flew to Saudi Arabia, where we had an air base there, and then to an air base, American air base in Turkey, and then we flew back to. Eventually, we sort of worked our way up.
Yeah. Got to see a lot of the world on that trip.
It was a long flight. Well, we didn't. It took a long time, though. It took about 2 weeks to fly back, because you couldn't. Those airplanes go about 400 miles, and then you refuel them and so forth.
Did you get a chance in any of these other places to get out and see, like in Saudi Arabia, or were you mostly on the air bases?
There was anything to see.
Okay.
It was just mostly just the air base, and then lots of desert. We did get out in Indonesia. That was lovely. We did get to stay a couple of days in Bangkok, Siam. Yeah, Indonesia.
Okay. So then you were back in France, and how long was your second stint in the military? How long did they keep you?
About a year and a half.
Now, was that based on points? Were they doing points still at that time, or was this connected with the Korean kind of thing?
Actually, after I was there about 6 months, a dictum came out, a decree came out that men who have served previously can apply for early discharge. And so I decided to stay a year, and I did. I stayed 1 year. That's how I happened to be at they said you could sign up for a year. I was having an interesting time, and I got to see France, and Morocco, and Algeria, and Tunisia, and those countries, because that's where we had air bases in.
Got to practice medicine, got to learn a lot about that.
Practice medicine, and got to, didn't get much pay, but we got it was lovely.
So then you came again back, discharged the second time.
And that was it.
And came back to Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And anything after the war that you would like to talk about? Did you get married and have children?
Only that I went back to the University Hospital and finished my training and spent 2 years in Boston at the Peter Brigham Hospital as a fellow in a specialty gastroenterology and subject. And then I met my wife in Boston. She was a dietitian at the hospital there, and I met her. And she's an Italian lady, Italian in fact. And we married and came back to Cincinnati, and I've been practicing since 1958, I think is when I went into practice. And I practiced till about 3 years ago.
Private practice?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. Sounds like you had a really fulfilling and
it was a long life. Yeah.
Interesting life so far. It's far from most.
I was lucky in some places.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, only that I've done a lot of traveling. I'm sort of a history nut myself, and I've done a lot of traveling, so gotten to some of these places. I did have the opportunity to visit when I was in the military in here. I visited Dachau, the death camp near Munich, and I did visit, and my wife on a more subsequent trip, we did get to see the concentration camp in, I can't think of it, in Poland.
Auschwitz?
Auschwitz, yes. And, you know, we did get to see lots of stuff we've heard about. We traveled here, and I got to see Europe at the end of the way it was at the end of World War II, because all of the cities at that time were still terribly damaged. Munich, I saw Munich, Frankfurt, Main, many of the smaller, Cologne.
Did you get to Berlin?
I did not get to Berlin, no. It was hard to go to Berlin.
Sure.
And I got to see France as it was, and at the time of the end of the war, Paris, you've been to Paris, but you would never have recognized it. It was a gray building, gray city. Everything was gray.
Really?
The building, and now they're a cream coat, as you know.
Sure.
Beautiful, but at that time, they had all the trees, they had all the setting, but the buildings were decrepit and they hadn't been attended to.
Sure.
And the people were still poor, very poor, and you saw some, well, I saw a city I saw Cherbourg and Dieppe, and I saw the city I remember very sure was Caen, C-A-E-N. It was a city in Normandy that had been badly damaged. It was very interesting, and I saw.
I meant to ask you, when you went to Dachau, that must have been in the early 50s.
Yeah, it was.
What was that like? Was that, I mean, I'm sure that had been cleaned up and there weren't...
They didn't clean it up too much. They tried to keep it fairly much the same. Of course, the prisoners were gone, but the buildings were still there, the ovens were there, and the other things were there. Dachau is a small city. It's near Munich. You can take the train there now. It's a growing city, and it was pretty much, it had not been damaged in the war, particularly. It hadn't been blown up. It was very close to Munich. But
what about I mean, I don't know if you noticed anything, but just being so close to that, time-wise, the citizens of Dachau, I mean, there must have been some sort of feeling of
I don't
regret or shame.
I know you would think so, but there was no feeling of that.
Okay.
But I spoke a little German, and I took German in college, and I could get by in German. But most of the Germans were very cooperative, and pleasant, and decent. They didn't express any feelings of that sort. Subsequently, I saw there are still Nazis around. There are still SS are still around, believe it or not. They're still there, and you don't have to go too far to scratch the surface. A few of them that volunteer their dislike of Jews and whatever they talk about.
Well, they're trying to march down here.
Crap. Yeah. Well, you know, we've got them in the United States. They're not called Nazis, but that's what they are. And there are lots of. We could tomorrow, if the government say we give all the bad guys guns, and there would soon be the Nazis.
Sure. Well, so this is a fascinating interview. I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank you for taking the time, and I really learned a lot today.
Well, I wish I had. Well, it's been fun, and I enjoyed it too. And it's fun to talk. You know, some of this I have to tell my children because I haven't told them any of this. Not that it was mystery or anything. It's just it's hard to get through.